As Israel continues to defend itself against Hamas's onslaught of rockets from Gaza, I would like to speak a little bit about my recent trip to Israel, from which I returned on July 4th. We all know the tragic events of the past month, in which 3 Israeli teens, Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali, were abducted and murdered, as Israeli authorities have confirmed, by Hamas operatives. But when I arrived in Israel with Congressman Ted Deutsch, we still had the hope that these boys were still alive. In fact, Ted and I had scheduled a meeting with the families for the morning of Tuesday, July 1, the day before we heard the horrific news. It was about 8 at night when I received word that the Israelis had found 3 gun-riddled bodies near Hebron, not too far from where the boys had been abducted. Israeli officials quickly confirmed the worst nightmares of an entire nation. The bodies were those of Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali. I cannot express to you the sadness I felt for the boys, for their mothers, for their families, and for the people of Israel. The sorrow was palpable. The mood across the entire country went from cautious optimism to overwhelming grief in an instant. Prime Minister Netanyahu made the announcement to the Israeli people, and he promised them that the Hamas operatives who were behind this would be brought to justice, and that Israel would not tolerate these acts of terror from Hamas that had already begun to launch rockets at Israel the day of the disappearance of the boys. So now, instead of meeting with the families to offer hope and support, Ted and I attended the funerals of Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali, seemingly joined by an entire nation. What I saw was a nation in mourning, but also a nation of resilience and pride that was unified as one trying to console their brothers and sisters. The next day, we went to pay our respects to the family and offer our condolences, but we also offered our support. We knew that Hamas was behind this atrocious act, and we knew that Israel could not allow Hamas to go unpunished, or else run the risk of seeing more of Israel's children abducted and murdered. I told the families that the United States and Israel are joined by more than just shared strategic interests. We are joined by shared values and ideologies. We both believe in freedom, democracy, the respect for human rights, and the safety of our citizens. And that is what I told Prime Minister Netanyahu when we met with him the following day, that the U.S. will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself, and that the American people stand side by side with the Israeli people. As President Reagan once said, the people of Israel and America are historic partners in the global quest for human dignity and freedom. We will always remain at each other's side. And that sentiment couldn't be any truer today. A strong America is a strong Israel, and a strong Israel is a strong America. But right now, Israel is under siege, having seen over 400 rockets fired at innocent civilian populations by Hamas, rockets that have hit Jerusalem and that have been intercepted by Iron Dome over Tel Aviv and even farther north. And even though all of us know that there is no comparison between Israel and Hamas, many in the international community will seek to equate the actions of the two. Yet the difference between the two could not be starker. One is a sovereign nation acting in self-defense, and the other is a terrorist organization that has no regard for human life or dignity and deliberately targets innocent civilians. That is why the United States must continue to support Israel's right to defend herself, and we must not legitimize those who seek to make this false equivalency. And that is also why we must press the Obama administration to enforce U.S. law, including one that I authored, the Palestinian Anti-Terrorism Act, which clearly states that no U.S. assistance can go to a Palestinian government that includes Hamas. The administration has been finding loopholes and playing with words and doing a contortionist act to get around these laws. The reality is that the Palestinian Authority government is backed by Hamas, and Hamas has an undue influence in its activities. It's time for the administration to demand something from the Palestinian Authority rather than forcing Israel into concessions. And it's time to suspend U.S. assistance to the PA in accordance with our laws. Thank you.